Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Housing Environment Overview Scrutiny Committee. This the Thursday, the 14th of March 2013. We had two major papers, but I'll go through the proper agenda as we have it in front of you. Fire evacuation procedures are as normal. Please don't get burnt. Please do vacate and meet in the War Memorial. We are being yes, we are being webcast. I'm just checking. Yes, it is on. Thank you. Apologies for absence. I have Councillor Sven Goddison, Councillor Marilyn Tucker, and the portfolio holder, Councillor Robert Donnell, who's just phoned in. Resignations and replacements. We welcome Councillor Paul Harvey in place of Councillor Mrs James. Thank you. Declaration of conflict of interest or whipping. Not aware of any. Nope. Urgent items, there are none. To confirm the minutes, this is paper A. On part 7.2, I'll hand over to Councillor Mrs Reid.
Thank you, Chair. I think we had quite a long and useful discussion on this, but looking back at the minutes now, I'm just a little bit concerned in case it sort of gets lost somewhere. This recommendation recommends that the Council considers the following principles. I don't know whether the committee would agree that we might like to just tighten that up a little bit so that we're sure this is actually going somewhere. So with the committee's indulgence, I was going to suggest that we maybe change 7.2.1 slightly, to say something like committee recommends that the relevant portfolio holder and Ofcoms consider the following when formulating its policies, in the hope that that will then make sure that we don't just lose this recommendation. Is everyone happy with that?
Councillor James?
I'm happy with that, but I'm a bit unhappy that apparently I wasn't here at the last meeting. And I'm sure I was very well behaved, and everything I said was constructive and useful. So I think I deserve to be mentioned in the minutes somewhere. So I'm only slightly offended.
If there's no dissent, I'll take it that those words and Councillor James's attendance will be recorded. Thank you. So I take it we can confirm the minutes, which is paper A, with those tiny correction at the beginning. 7.2, sorry. Member and public participation. We have apologies to Councillor Robert Donald, but I welcome Councillor Cathy Austin here. And also on paper B, Councillor Shaw to speak, who's already requested. It's on in front of us. That's 8 and 9 done. 10 referrals, there are none, and 11 there are none. So now the meat of the evening, which is items 12 and 13. Item 12, which is paper B. I'll ask the officers to introduce it. Thank you. Councillor Shaw, would you like to come to the table? I'm advised the officers would normally speak to the paper first. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, members. This report seeks to establish a members' advisory panel which will consider options and advise the portfolio holders for partnership and community sport and culture on an appropriate charging framework and criteria for use in determining future parking fees and charges. The report puts forward some draft terms of reference for the members' advisory panel and seeks comments from the committee on both the establishment of the map and the proposed terms of reference.
Councillor Shaw, would you like to come forward? You do have 2 minutes, but I'm sure if you go over, no one's going to be too bothered.
Lovely. Thank you for your indulgence, Chair. And in a step towards new technology, I can see a figure that gives me a bit of a countdown here, but it seems actually to be fixed on 2 minutes. So, well done for now switching it on. Thank you. As members will probably be aware, you know, I want to speak particularly about residents' parking charges, i.e. The charges for residents to be able to have on-street parking in areas where that is controlled. And as members will probably also be aware, it's an issue of some controversy because for 2 years running now, I and residents have been arguing vociferously against increases in residents' parking charges. And the sort of background to that really is that residents are not clear about, you know, why parking charges are set at the level they are. They're not clear about how those are costed, and they therefore, understandably, question the reasonableness of those charges. So it is really important that there is this review and that it does look very seriously at this whole issue. And more than anything else, I want to argue for absolute transparency and openness from the council to residents about exactly how the charges are calculated, what costs are included in those charges, and the basis and rationale for how those charges are set, because that is absolutely essential from the point of view of residents and their understanding and consent and acceptance of these charges. So I really urge the importance of this review, and I do also ask for the members of the panel to look at the differences between the charging regime that really ought to apply between car parks and residents parking, residents on-street parking, because these are two very different kinds of issue, which I think should have different charging regimes. So thank you for your time.
Could I ask one question of you, please? Would you be happy to sit on the map?
I don't wish to actually, Chair. Reason being that, you know, actually, although I sort of understand the rationale for some of these maps, I have a certain scepticism about them, because I think sometimes, you know, they take decisions or make recommendations that really ought to be down to the portfolio holder concerned to actually tie their colours to the mast. So I don't wish to be a member of this particular map, but I will take an interest in its deliberations, and if given the opportunity, I'd be happy to give my views to the map as well. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Would the officers like to respond to any of that? In which case, I'll open it up to Councillor James.
A few questions. The first one is why a map? I see no reason why we can't discuss parking fees and charges in public and in committee. I think maps have a purpose, and I remember Basingstoke Live where the committee calendar didn't allow us to make that decision quickly. There seems the pressure on this is not massive. We've got to make a decision by December, but why a map? Why not just do it in a public committee?
First of all, to answer your question about timeline, December isn't our timeline, July is our timeline. Obviously, we need to, whatever comes out of this map, we need to feed into the annual review of fees and charges, which the process for that starts during August. So clearly our deadline for getting something out of the map is late July into August. Why a map? Simply, I mean, parking charges is a complex issue. I think even Councillor Shaw there just alluded to it. It's not just about residents parking, what we charge our residents, or what we charge our customers of our car parks. The two of issues are actually very, very different, but each one has its own complexities, and therefore we felt that would be better discussed in a smaller forum, but certainly we make this quite clear in the draft terms of reference, a transparent forum whereby we can have a discussion, and the map will then come back and advise this committee about a way forward.
the second question you almost prompted, because the issues around town centre parking, pay and display, is very different from residential parking. The prime example is that when we look at pay and display car parks, we look at what they charge in Camberley and Guildford and all these things. Well, quite clearly a local resident in my ward is not going to turn around and say, well, it's so expensive in Basingstoke, I'm going to park my car outside my house in Fleet, because it's just not practical. So they are totally different. So I'm not understanding why we're looking at them together, because clearly they are very different. So can't they be looked at differently?
But the proposal isn't to look at them together. The proposal is to have a map which would meet probably on at least 2 occasions, possibly a third, but certainly on 2 occasions. One to discuss the charges we apply in our car park, one to discuss the charges we apply to our residents for on-street residential parking, and we made that quite clear within in the paper. That's our desire, and we believe that's perhaps the best way to do it. It will allow much more focused discussion about charges on street or charges in a car park, without the whole issue of charges being muddied by a general discussion about parking charges.
Final question is in 4.2 of the paper. The last sort of sentence says the general aim is to achieve a set percentage increase to the overall parking income. I'm a bit puzzled by a borough that its general aim is to achieve 0 increase in council tax is the same borough that wants to charge residents more money for parking. It seems that if you don't park in the town, then we want to freeze your pay or freeze what we charge you. And if you happen to live in the town or visit the town, we want to get more money out of you. I'm not understanding the conflicts between not wanting to charge residents more for council services and then wanting to charge them more for council services.
I think possibly what is said there is that there is currently no framework, and as a result of there being no framework, we generally have applied a percentage increase in the past. We want to obviously get away from that situation where we apply an increase because an increase is necessary or is required, not necessarily just across the board X% increase.
Councillor Harvey.
Thank you, Chair. I guess to start with, I'll just comment. I agree with Gavin. I just think the idea of having a map where it's the office is presenting the evidence to the members, but it isn't to the public, is an issue, particularly around this one, because this is very public. I mean, these are directly issues that affect residents parking in the town centre, shopping and using facilities in the town centre, as much as the shops and the economy of the local town centres. That's key in that respect. And then in terms of residences, I mean, as Gavin and John have rightly said, Jack and Stuart share your views, I'm sure, as well. As we do in Norden, around the town centre, our wards are directly impacted because of residents parking in a way that is very subtly different. So those issues, I think, should be debated publicly. And it's not to say that, every map is a bad idea. It's just that these should be something that residents can contribute in debate to. And I'm sure if they knew it was going on, which is an issue in itself, and they were aware that these issues were being raised and discussed around the committee table, residents would be interested, because it is a political hot potato. It is one of those that they do get worked up about, quite rightly so, because they want to justify why is it that it is. And I guess from this year, why is it that the Malls car park went up by 6%, way above inflation? Twice inflation if you look at some of the figures. So in that sense, there's some pretty difficult and controversial issues. So let's not hide them away. Let's debate them in public openly, Chair. That's my question, really. My point to yourself and to the office is why we can't have this, and the cabinet members, why we can't.
I refer back really to my previous answer that the whole topic of car parking charges is as complex as it is, and I do feel that in a perhaps a committee situation rather than a map situation, I think the issue could perhaps not get the full consideration possibly that it perhaps requires. I do think a map will be much more focused on that particular issue.
Would the portfolio holder like to speak? It's optional.
I think basically we're looking at a map with the various parties on it, because I think we would get a very fair account from our councillors as to what and the way forward on this. There is a tight timescale as well, but I'm not saying that a tight timescale means that we have to do everything not properly and nothing's to be done properly. But I would say, and I would recommend a map with cross-party and residents' feedback. I certainly have got a lot of residents' feedback at the moment because I've been out and talking to them in the streets, etc. And I just think the way forward is a map, but I will listen to what you have to say. And I think we will get it done much quicker and fairer this year than next year.
Yes, Mrs. Baker.
Thank you, Chair. What worries me is the map is reporting back, presumably to this committee, on the 18th of July. And what I fear is that members of the map will have done their work and it'll come back to the committee, and us who are not on the map will look at it and start saying, but did you think of this? Did you think of that? And we could actually be further back rather than actually advancing the programme for getting a policy that we all understand and all could support.
Sorry, Councillor James.
I've just been checking my diary, and there's this committee meets again on May the 8th, which would seem a good time to discuss the paper rather than having a separate map. The other thing, I have a question for the officer.
The May the 8th is a specific one-off meeting for the housing strategy, and that will certainly take the whole evening.
My diary fails me. The other question I have is the aims of the map. Is if we talk about an agreed charging framework, and the moment we ad hoc make it up every year, and we want a framework for making it decisions. Now, if you put the residence parking to one side and look at the town centre parking, our strategy is driven by economic changes, capacity of the car park, what other authorities are doing, which we have no control over and the map won't be aware of. So we can have the world's greatest framework, but then when Reading says we're half pricing all our parking charges and we think we need to react, then our framework goes out the window. If we have lots of shops closing because we're just not attracting shoppers and we look at doing things differently, our framework goes out the window. So we can have all these meetings to get a framework which we possibly won't stick to anyway. So I'm not quite sure what the point is. What's the framework going to do that's going to mean that we can say, right, we never have to worry about it again because it happens automatically?
I think Councillor Shaw had the answer when he first spoke, saying residents actually would like to know why, what and how.
Very clear, the residents parking to one side is totally different, it's a totally separate issue, and I think it just muddies the waters in terms of looking at the pay and display car parking, which is of a wider issue to more people because more people use it. The only people who don't use town centre car parking are residents who live in the town centre and park outside their houses because they just walk in. I walk into town, I very rarely use pay and display. But if we're having a framework, there's no point having a framework which is going to change every year because it's going to have to change because you have to react to what's happening in the real world. So I'm not quite sure what the map will achieve by having a discussion about, right, this is a framework, we've worked it out, we're going to go up 4% every year for the next forever. When actually that's not going to happen, is it? Because we've got to react to what's happening. So what's the point in the framework for pay and display? Forget residents for a minute. Residents parking, don't forget, you never forget residents, but forget residents parking for a minute, separate issue, totally different, and any map about that should probably involve the councillors who are affected by it, represent those residents, but the actual town centre parking charges, I don't get the framework, the point of what the framework will look like or could look like.
Sorry.
In terms of the town centre charges, the map, the purpose of the map is to ask some of those questions that possibly we've not really asked ourselves before, such as, should we charge more at the Miles car park because it offers more than some of the other surface car parks? Should we charge less perhaps in some of our top town car parks because we are trying to encourage people to use those areas? That is the whole purpose of the map, is to have that discussion, understand the issues with perhaps putting charges up or putting charges down, as the case may be, and to bring back to this committee at least a draft framework as to how we go about setting our charges in future. It may not be that the framework says we shall put it up by X%, and I would hope actually the framework doesn't say that, but it's so we can have a framework in future for how we propose our charges and how we put our charges forward, so that come August every year, there isn't a significant piece of work for officers to do, which looks at our neighbours, which looks at other towns and see what those charges are, and therefore to see how we should adjust our charges accordingly. It's to put in place a framework and also a strategy for how our parking can be better used. And I think it talks in terms of reference about the park and ride and how perhaps parking charges are applied to encourage perhaps better use of the park and ride. And again, that's the whole purpose of the map, is to have that discussion and about that. Perhaps look at some options and some models that we as officers could develop before the map, and really recognise the implications of what those models might mean to income to the council, and also to the residents as well.
Councillor Tilbury?
I think there is a problem with maps. I think I don't know how many there are at the moment. It'd be interesting to find out. But I mean, I had this with Tracy the other day. We're just, a map after we're completely mapped out as councillors, and you can only do so many. And I'm not sure this needs. I think we do need that sort of. I don't think it's particularly complex. I mean, I think some of the issues that are raised in here about sort of a distortion of the market by pricing too far below private operators' charging levels. Well, I don't think we can ever be too far below private operators' charging levels, and charges are not comparable to those of other local authorities. Well, Gavin's raised that. We were told the other day at the full council we're in a fight to the death with all these other local authorities to try and attract trade. Where as long as we can cover our costs of repairing it, resurfacing the car parks, if we could provide very cheap car parking, that would be to the benefit of the traders in the town. I'm sure they would welcome that, because they're being driven out and the only beneficiaries are the large supermarkets, the edge of town, because they've got free car parking. That's the real competition here. All those poor people at the top of town who are struggling to survive. I mean, it was noticeable when Papersmiths closed that no one took that on, because who would with Hobbycraft up the road? They've got no chance of competing with that. We need to look at these issues there, but I think we can do that as a committee, and we need to decide how we're going to deal with these things there. And the trouble is, we don't have control, as you say, we're Reading in other areas, and if we are in this fight to the death with them all, then we're in a better position than them. If they don't like it, then they can drop their prices, which is surely, what the market should be doing anyway. Thank you.
Councillor Harvey?
Thank you, Chair. And I guess the first thing to say in relation to the first page is the report, section 4, is just, the idea of inconsistencies and the idea of an ad hoc approach is disturbing anyway, because residents have a right to say, well, why is it here and not there? Why are you doing this and not this? So I think that's a very fair point to make, because at the moment the regime isn't fit for purpose. That doesn't mean that, and I guess this is the problem with the map, and again, to add to what's been said, but to broaden it a little, the evidence from shop and traders in the town, the evidence from residents in the town, and the evidence from visitors to the town, I think is key to this, because you can't just sit round the table as a group of councillors and with the evidence that, with all due respect, the officers come up with, but may not be everything, take a finger in the air approach to, well, what do we think it is, guys? And the evidence base does need to include those particular areas and those particular stakeholders. And I guess how do we do that in a time frame that you need by July is an interesting point, because does that then become another ad hoc fix, if you like, another elastiplast? This needs to be something that's meaningful. And I think we all want that around the table. We all want it to be meaningful. And the other thing to bear in mind, I think, at the moment, I'm just saying about the top of town, when you walk down the top of town at the moment and the number of empty shops is deeply concerning, and there are more going under. I mean, talking to the shop owners, they are really, really struggling. Car parking is part of it, the rents are as well. So that there is a relationship here, very much so, to accessibility. In all senses. So for me at the moment, I appreciate what's been argued, but simply batting it to a map without having the ability to directly get the public's input to this in all its forms and the stakeholders' input is a concern. I'd like to see that stakeholder input, Chair, in some way, shape or form. And this committee is probably the best way to do it, because it's public, it's open, appreciating what everybody has said about the reasons why you want a map.
I'm unsure how to move this forward, because this committee here, although we are in public and although we're on web, if we had, for argument's sake, 50 residents in here now, some of them would be regarding their own parking outside the house, some would be regarding parking when they come in as visitors. I'm not sure that this committee is the right committee for doing that, because we have an open session and a closed session. I do want to hear from all the people out there, but I'm not sure that a full committee like this is the best way of doing it. One way of moving it forward is to go to group leaders saying, could we please have some people for a meeting to actually try and move it forward. If a map is not this committee's chosen way forward, then we need another way forward. We do need to get rid of inconsistencies, and we do need to be transparent, and preferably all party agreement. Councillor Peach.
Thank you, Chair. There seems to be on Appendix 1 of the paper, there's 4 sort of guiding principles to what you wanted to achieve out of the framework. And they seem pretty sensible. And I'm just wondering whether they could be taken as saying, from a strategic point of view, that's what we want from how we're going to charge. And perhaps if a paper was presented that addressed those issues and how that would be done, could that be suggested to us? So rather than, I'm just saying maybe, rather than having a map where we sort of go through the whole process, and there seems to be a debate whether it could be done in time and the types of evidence that we might need. If the officers presented a paper using these as the key strategic points, and the most important one's got to be around our thriving town centre economy, and being able to react to current economic climates and changes in demand, then that to me is sort of addressing a lot of the issues around car park charging. The paper even suggests things like charging slightly less in areas where the high street needs to pick up in demand, and other areas perhaps where it's closer to facilities and maybe it could be justified of charging a slightly higher amount. I think if as a resident, if someone could phone up and question some things, and I don't understand why my parking fee has gone up by X, and we can say, well, that's because A, B and C, or it's gone down in this area because of these reasons. I think most people would be probably quite happy with that. Perhaps that's the way forward.
Thank you. I'll let the portfolio holder come in here.
Just listening, thank you. Is there, to take this forward, if you had the map, could you not have some way that the map could interact with the general public, to the residents that it agrees with, and the map themselves can do this and get information back from the residents? I don't think that would be insurmountable.
I've just had nods from left and right that that's quite practical. Sorry, Councillor James.
It's just a thought, and it goes back to the very, very big difference between residential parking, which is a necessity, residents have to park, and they need to park near their homes, and they have to have permits, have no choice, and pay and display car parks, which are totally different because they're not things people use daily. People may want to use the bus instead. It's a different matter, and I know we say we want to get rid of inconsistencies, but we're also saying that some car parking should be charged less than other car parking because it might be right to have inconsistencies. So we've got an inconsistent argument about inconsistency. But that aside, if we forget residents parking for a moment, because it's a totally separate issue, and I think it applies to a smaller number of people that are understandably passionate about it, and I think that's something that what would be interesting is to say, let's make a decision now, or the portfolio holder can say that we will link residents' parking permits to council tax. If council tax goes up by 2%, residents' permits go up by 2%. If council tax is frozen, residents' permits are frozen. That would seem completely fair and absolutely logical and save any debate or fuss in the future. In terms of the actual town centre car parking, I don't see any reason why the portfolio holder with the officers can't come together, put together a report with a number of options that can be brought back to this committee on the 18th of July, so that we can discuss the report and discuss the options within that report, and then the portfolio holder will be here. She hasn't got to come out to a separate map. She can just come to that, listen to the debate, and then make a normal cabinet decision and view on the July cabinet, or whenever it goes, December cabinet. She's got 6 months or 5 months to think about what's been said in committee to actually have that ready. So there's no reason why we can't be discussing a full report with the options in there around pay and display parking, town centre parking as it is, public parking. That can be done through the map, through this OSCOM in the normal way with a proper full report coming before this committee. The residential parking is separate. I do think attaching it to council tax is completely fair, but I doubt they'll do it. But that's perhaps a separate piece of work which is a bit more sensitive and shouldn't be thrown in with this into one big hat, because they are so different that they really shouldn't be mixed up. That might be a way forward, because then it just comes to OSCOM, there's no map, we'll get a nice report, have that debate, discussion all together, all around the table, residents can sit in, listen, watch and whatever, and we'll have a different go at the residential parking, perhaps another time, but we can always freeze it for this year.
I agree with a tiny bit, but tying residential parking to council tax, I think you're missing the point. The point of residential parking is if there's a demand for 10 places and a road with only 9, or if there's a demand of 8 places and a road can take 20, we shouldn't have one policy fits all. We've got to actually look at each road, and also where there's been issues in the past, we've got to look at in greater detail. And having some serious issues with one house, for argument's sake, having 4 cars, and the neighbouring house having 0 or 1 car. Those issues need to be looked at in great detail. So I don't think it's a simple issue of a certain percent rise on it, because some of the houses are, there's been some real issues, probably in your patch as well. As for the town centre car parking, that may be a possible way forward. Actually, sorry, I shouldn't say town centre car parking. The car parks where we charge, because it's not just town centre, is it? And I'm being reminded, equally, car parks where you don't charge at all. So, would the officer like to...
Well, I was just going to pick up on the point Mrs. Ostleton made there. I believe that within the map there is an opportunity somehow to, and I've scribbled down, receive evidence or provide an opportunity for the stakeholders to input to that map process. And I think that could be reflected quite easily in the terms of reference, whereby, for example, we could ask a group of residents along to a map to give us their views on the options for how we might in future set permit charges. We might ask a group of town centre traders along to, again, so they can give their perspective on how we might set town centre car parking charges. So I think that can be done through the terms of reference and through a map. I do believe, and the chair's alluded to quite a few points there just a moment ago, both of these issues in themselves are extremely complex, and I do feel that the debate that will be had around them probably is better placed in a map. Not trying to be non-transparent, I'm trying to be totally transparent here, but I just believe that you could spend a significant time as a committee having a discussion about various options. I'm looking to perhaps bring to the map possibly half a dozen, perhaps even 10 options to how our charging might be applied in town centre car parks. That in itself could just be one evening's debate, dare I say it.
Councillor James.
We still didn't cover the point of why residential parking should be treated separately. The thing is as well with a map, that if we have a map and we invite the local traders and perhaps shoppers into that map to give their evidence in front of a group of councillors, which wouldn't be too dissimilar to the size of councillors we've got tonight. We would like to have it webcast because that means that other residents who couldn't make it could actually watch and see what happens and what the conversation is like. And those kind of maps are called OSCOMs. And that's the point. You know, that if you stretch a map big enough, it becomes exactly what we are tonight. So I think, let's say, the residential parking needs to be treated separately. It is different. It's got to be out of the way. The town centre car park, I don't think it's that complex. I mean, if we're going to have people come into a map and give evidence to a committee of councillors, equally that evidence could be gathered by yourself and your team, by putting out a survey to the top of town or whatever, or to various shoppers to get their feedback. A lot of these shop managers aren't going to want to come out for the evening and spend time at map. They may fill out a survey saying, yes, I'm losing business and I think it's parking, or actually parking is good, or whatever their reasons are. Some quick survey to get the information off them without them having to put themselves out. That could then be included within a report. Yes, it might be a meaty report, but most committees these days are a bit light. You know, we regularly see that committees, bits in my diary disappear because the backup committee is now being cancelled, the reserve date has now been removed. So I think capacity is there. We've got to turn up anyway. I'd be happier to talk about it with a full report, lots of evidence gathered, and on a webcast, than talking about it in an unsmoke-filled room these days. It's talking about it in separate, privately, and then still coming back to the committee and still having the same arguments for those who weren't on the map, saying, "Oh, did you think of this?" I think we kind of go round in a big circle. It's actually quite simple because the default is we stay as we are on this issue. So I don't think it's anywhere near as complex as we make out it is. We've survived every year with this ad hoc, and I still think there's been a large element of ad hocness because we are reacting to changing economics and we're reacting to changing needs of shoppers, changing businesses, the internet shopper, everything else. You know, I think it's one of those things that it's very difficult to have a plan that's going to last for years and years and years before it gets reviewed, because we're not in that kind of world. We're in a very changing world. So I think it'd be better to have the report, to look at 2014-15, what the charges are going to be, have that discussion in a committee, and then the portfolio can make their decision with having listened to informed debate. I'm not sure what the point of having an extra map that's a bit like an OSCOM rather than having an OSCOM.
Could I ask the officers to just explain the timings, the feasibility, and what? Because first of all, we need to know when we have the decisions, what, and whether we've got time. Because what you said there, Councillor Jan, this committee has actually got quite a workload. But can we have the timings and when things have to be in by, please? Councillor Harvey.
Just to say, I mean, it doesn't have to be this OSCOM. It could be quite. There are members who sit round the table at other committees that have been cancelled recently because they've got nothing on their agenda to debate. You know, we might well have this OSCOM being very, very busy, and P&I might be very, very busy, but there are other OSCOMs that have had their meetings cancelled because they've got nothing to do. And that is within the time frame that we're talking about. So why does it have to be this committee? If members are passionate about it, they will come along and speak as visiting councillors. They can substitute if they wish to be on the committee if their other colleagues support them, but it would be at an OSCOM. It's not beyond it. So to move it on, Chair, if others are willing to, I would move that is what we do and put the recommendation on the table. Let's do this. If this is the right way forward, and I think a lot of us around the table seem to be agreeing in some way, let's do that. Is there a relevant OSCOM within the time frame where this can be added to the agenda and that can be actioned?
Can I ask the officers just to clarify whether that is practical, feasible and allowed? Councillor James?
The town centre car parking is probably more relevant to EPP because it's supporting the economic prosperity of the town. Residential parking could be argued that it's more to do with community well-being because it's actually communities
Thank
supporting.
you very much. That's what's going through my mind. Yes. Although we do need a crossover because there will be some people where they cheaper to park in a pay car park than there are issues whether people have extra permits for visitors or whether they park in car parks. So there is linkage between the two.
I think the reality is, Chair, it can be argued for any committee because it's a planning issue as much as it is also an environmental issue. It's just the
I'll let the
timetable.
portfolio holder speak.
No, I just wanted to say to split because Councillor Still is the car parking. I'm just residential.
I've learned something about the cabinet.
When the fees and charges went up 2 years ago, and I asked for a full list from Richard of who's got residence parking permits, etc. When that list came out, there was no residents with more than 2 parking permits, although they may have had a visitor's permit. Everyone had a residence permit, also had a visitor's permit, and there was, I think, 11 households that had a visitor's permit but no residence permit. So the numbers are quite small and controlled. So we have that information, we have that data, so it's not like we've got to do a massive piece of work. The issues around parking in residential areas, where there's a shortage, of course, we thankfully now have this extra £500,000 to spend, so where there are particular issues, we don't have to worry too much, because I'm sure the portfolio holder in charge of that budget is going to fix it.
Everything will be fixed, it's just a matter of time. I'd just like the officers to have their chat and see what the position is. I'll ask the officer to convey to the committee what they've discussed.
Right, I shall attempt to explain where we're at. The issue with the committee dates in terms of workload and dates being cancelled doesn't apply to this committee. We're actually adding in reserve dates, and we have done every month since January. Officers were due to bring this paper to the July committee anyway, so if it's the committee's decision that they want a committee report, that committee cycle is already in the framework, so there isn't an issue about going to a different committee. Sorry?
Right, that's fine. Yeah.
The issue then is what comes to this committee. Councillor Peach made a suggestion around a framework looking something like the terms of reference that are laid out here. Councillor James has made reference to a report along similar lines but covering all of the evidence and bringing options to that committee. One thing I think we should point out is if that report comes to the committee, it will be officers' recommendations as to what the framework for charging should look like. The committee meeting isn't about setting the fees, it's about a process for arriving at the fees, and those things need to be understood up front for that committee. So I guess it's over to you to decide how you want to bring that forward.
So to clarify, we can come to the July Housing Overview Committee with this and a much more detailed paper.
That's for the committee to decide. The point I'm making is that had the process officers recommended been followed, we'd have been back here in July anyway. So that committee time is already set aside, if you like. What we have to decide is what is going to come to that committee in July, if that's how you want to play it.
Can I just add, I think also, again, had we followed the process officers recommending the almost wacky options that perhaps we would be putting to you, dare I say, would have been dismissed much earlier. They will probably, dare I say, come to you in July for you to dismiss them, where they could have been dismissed much earlier, which would have given us then a much more focused approach as to what we do bring to you in July. And so that was partly the reason for taking the view that perhaps that was the best route.
Councillor Mrs Baker.
I'm quite interested in the notion that some very useful information could be gathered by putting some of the possibilities for town centre and charged parking, play and display type parking, to EPP ahead of our meeting in July, so that they can pick up and have input to on the issues concerning town centre vitality and the impact of and the comparators between Basingstoke and alternative shopping venues, because that's right up their street, and perhaps their schedules would allow them the opportunity to look at that side. Perhaps community wellbeing might be able to look at some of the issues on residence parking, and so our meeting in July might be informed by outputs from both of those OSCOMs.
I'm nervous of repeating work, but that is a way forward, because I would prefer all the parking issues, which is there's pay and display car parking, there's free car parking, and there's residence, which is town centre pay car parking, which is I think the big one. Then there's the rest of the borough and the free ones. To me, it makes sense to have it all brought together, but if it's the committee's wish that we split it out, which it appears that's the direction we're going, and then come back to this committee.
Yeah.
8th of May, 9th of July, the two EPP meetings apparently. We just... yeah. Can we just see the feasibility? So we're suggesting that if the one that appears to be the main crux one is the pay and display in the town centre, although we are talking about the whole borough as well. So if the pay and display for the town centre went to the EPP 14th of May, so it goes through there and then comes back to this committee as the map was going to report back. Does that meet with everybody's approval?
Yes.
There are already 4 papers scheduled for that EPP. I just, to be fair, there is a fees and charges review at that committee that night.
Ah, right. So
There we go. We'll recommend that.
Right, I'm trying to get committee approval. So the pay car parks that the borough has control over in Basingstoke Town Centre, I'm not quite sure where the town centre, but the principal goes to EPP. We do have charge ones outside the town centre, I believe, but it's the town centre is the crucial bit, isn't it? Hopefully the rest will fall into place. Goes to EPP, then it comes back to this committee in July. Let's just make sure that.
Members, if I could have your attention, please. Having just looked further at the 14th of May EPP agenda, and having noticed that the fees and charges review is on there, there is a danger, because obviously that is a big piece of work looking at the nitty-gritty of fees and charges, that the paper that you're talking about will get overlooked and usurped by the bigger discussion on that evening. That's officers' concerns for that evening.
I do need some ideas from Councillor Peach.
And so the other option that you put on the table, if I recall correctly, was that the officers would go off, do the work. We wouldn't have the choice of all the different multiple options that potentially we might like, but they would get trimmed out, and we'd get a report where we can comment on recommendations. Perhaps you might even have prices fixed in that we wouldn't be able to change. I'm just thinking what it would be limited in what we could do at that point, because if at that stage we then turned around and said, no, what about this option, could you do X, Y and Z, then you're going back from July to do further work and things get pushed. So although it's an option, I'm kind of understanding. I know there's a dislike to maps clearly, but I can understand why with the complexities, because as you're going around all the dates, it seems to be issues at every corner you turn. Perhaps there's no other option. I don't know.
Councillor Reid.
Thank you, Chair. Well, do we then come back to the point where we say what we said a little while ago, that we asked for a report in July that comes here without taking it out to EPP or anywhere else, and we discuss the report here, as we would have done anyway with the map? It's just that we have the whole report and we have the whole discussion on that night, and we take it from there. Would that be the simplest thing?
It seems like we've resolved it then. We don't potentially have so many different options and avenues. The officer does their report and we discuss it in the July here at the July meeting. But there will be other items on the agenda. We can't devote the whole 2 or 3 hours to it. It's going to be very difficult at that meeting to invite residents in to talk, because they've got a right, yes. But I felt I'd prefer to have a specific one for it, but we can't do that. It won't fit. Councillor Peach.
Yeah, I just need to get clear in my head that if it comes back in July, that the committee are aware, if it's the case, that we are restricted as to the amount of recommendations and everything we send back if this deadline is July in order to get the work done. Because to me, potentially, we're cutting ourselves short of having the opportunity of having our say and fully putting into it.
Councillor Reid.
Yes, I mean, I do take Councillor Peach's point, but on the other hand, we're frequently having to do that. We frequently have a report that we have to decide on the night. We don't have further time for it to bounce backwards and forwards, so we're only doing what we've done previously. So I just think, you know, to keep it simple, we should be concentrating on having a report in the July meeting and making a decision then.
Councillor Waldridge.
Just a question, is there not an EPP reserve date that can be used for, have you looked at that option? I presume you haven't, but...
Community. This community.
You'll have the answer in a half a minute or a minute.
Simple answer is no, there isn't a reserve date, and looking at the way the committee meetings are scheduled, it would be difficult to get one in the time frame.
To draw this to a conclusion then, could you just clarify if I've got this right, please? We're asking the officers, which is the two members here to my right, to draw up proposals to come to the July meeting, let's get that right. To the July meeting that we're meeting here on the normal pre-arranged date to look at car parking charges and the residents and the whole borough. So Harvey.
Yeah, fitting everything in, isn't it? Just to think through in terms of what we're asking the officers to do, I think the principles that have been spoken about are the key. I think the evidence gathering, it gives you time between now and July to get the evidence from the relevant stakeholders that could be presented on the night. And appreciating what the officer said about wacky ideas, I'd like to think that the officers would come forward with, here are the principles, these are the evidence, this is however many, but an appropriate amount of options for the committee to simply consider. You put A through B through C, and we can reach a conclusion that would be advisable to then EPP back in the autumn, when they actually will be setting the fees and charges at a level. So it's almost a two-taste process anyway, because we're not going to sit around the committee in July as much as we'd like setting the actual figure, are we?
When I read this paper earlier, I read it as to try and get the framework and the structure and the transparency in, that if this is what the committee's wish is, that we ask the officers to do it and we just decide on an officer's recommendation. We recommend.
Yeah.
We recommend. Right, if that's the committee's decision, that is paper B seen to. Thank you. Would the officers for paper C like to come forward? Thank you. Right, I thank the previous officers and welcome the new officers here. We're on paper C, which is waste and recycling, and I'll ask you to open the paper up. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. My name's John Elson. I'm the head of technical services from Hart District Council and the joint waste client team. who manages the waste service for Basingstoke. I'd like to introduce you, for those members that don't already know, Kevin who's sitting here to my left, who's the Waste and Recycling Officer, one of the Waste and Recycling Officers in the Joint Waste Client Team. Kevin's kindly come along tonight to answer any questions that I can't cover. Thank you. Before we start, I'd just like to check that members have all seen the updated Appendix 2 to the report. There were a couple of figures in that appendix which were incorrect. They related to the tonnage of glass collected in the third quarter of this year, and the initial figures that were in the report only included months 1 and 2 of the third quarter. So if members haven't got that, possibly they could get a copy of that.
Could we just clarify you have got it, please? Because it is, we do want to be talking the same figures.
There is another appendix as well before you run round. Hopefully everybody's got that. And that was an email that was sent out by Karen Brimacombe relating to the environmental impact of the curbside glass. Okay, and finally, I'd just like to clarify there is a point in the report which I've noted, paragraph 3.2. The information there, it says the current cost of the borough-wide curbside glass collection scheme is £205,700. Having reviewed this with finance, the figure I have is the actual cost of the service is £323,000. However, you need to offset that against income for the service, which is forecast, and that's detailed in the report, through glass recycling credits and also through income of about 200,000, which would give a net cost for the service of about 123,000. So I just wanted to clarify those points before we start.
Councillor Baker?
Thank you. Terribly sorry, but I was still looking at the percentages on the graphs and thinking about them. Would you possibly mind repeating which of the figures that you were on the financial ones?
Certainly can. So it relates to paragraph 3.2. The report says that the cost of the curbside glass collection scheme is £205,700 per annum, and the figures I've obtained from finance, checked with finance this afternoon, say that it's 323,000 with less an income of 200,000, giving a net cost of the scheme of about 123,000.
Councillor Peach.
Thank you. So just to clarify, the 205,700, is that the equivalent of your 323,000 figure or the 123?
Okay, so that just points of clarification, so before we start. Hopefully everything else you'll find is okay. So the report itself deals with 3 issues. It reviews the curbside glass rollout of the scheme. It makes recommendations regarding the removal of glass banks and also of banning glass from the black bins. Bottles and jars have been reminded to mention on the glass banks, which is, banning of bottles and jars from the black bins. With regard to the review of the rollout, members may well remember that it was June 2011 the Cabinet agreed to the phased implementation of the curbside glass scheme. And in November 2011 this committee itself reviewed the success of phase 1, and following that the continued rollout of the scheme occurred across the borough, with the rollout being completed in September 2012, which was on schedule with the planned implementation date. As far as finance for the scheme was concerned, the initial scheme identified an estimated implementation cost of about 330,000. The actual cost of implementation was 223,000, so about 100,000 under budget. So not only have we delivered on time, we've delivered well within budget. On an ongoing basis, the operation of the scheme, as I've already mentioned, is running at about £323,000 per annum, which is less than was originally anticipated as part of the budget process. And as I say, the net cost of that, by the time you take out the glass income and recycling credits, is about 123,000. So it was delivered on schedule and within budget. The recycling rate prior to implementation of the glass scheme, it was anticipated that we'd deliver an increase in recycling rate of about 5%. Current figures that we're reporting are about 2.5%, which is, I'd say, disappointing at this stage, but it is early days. And having reviewed the figures for Basingstoke with neighbouring authorities that operate curbside glass collection, I do feel confident that that figure should increase and continue to increase over the coming years. Can mention that Hart itself, who operates a fortnightly curbside collection rate, is collecting about 10% of their recycling is glass. That compares with about 7% for Basingstoke. So I think it quite reasonable. I know there's different demographics, but I do think it reasonable to assume that figures we're looking at will increase. Can say that the client team, joint client team, are working on promotion and working with various residents to try and encourage an increased take-up. We also have the report which is proposing the removal of the glass banks and the banning of glass from the black bins, which hopefully will lead to an increase in that figure. As far as the removal of the glass banks is concerned, details of this are contained within Appendix 1, the sites we're looking at. As members will be aware, when we reported this initially, we did anticipate that there would be a reduction in the glass bank usage. I think would make sense. That has been seen to happen. Monitoring has suggested that the use of the glass banks has dropped by about 75%. As a result, we're now proposing that the banks listed in Appendix 1 are removed. Should we do that, that will save a further 38,000 for the council. Banning of the glass from the black bins is another proposal we're putting forward, and we'd like to seek members' approval for that, seek their support for that. We hope that by doing this, it will send out a clear message to the residents that it is important that they recycle their glass, that they use their glass bins, and hopefully result in an increase in the recycling rate. Having looked at this, we do feel it reasonable to assume that we get another 1% as a result of this ban of glass. And it is important to remember that all residents do have the opportunity to use glass crates. Okay, to conclude, just to say that the rollout of the scheme has been a great success. The project was delivered on time and within budget. The increase in the recycling initially possibly is a bit disappointing, but I do hope to see that increase in the future. I hope members will see fit to support the removal of the banks and the banning of glass, as I do see these as being important things to help reinforce the message to encourage people to use the curbside scheme. I'd also like to finish now by thanking all the staff involved in delivering this project within both the joint client team and Veolia. Particular mention to Sarah Robinson, who's written the report, who's led on the implementation of this scheme, but unfortunately can't be here tonight. And also to those officers who members will be aware of who were involved in the planning of this scheme, but who no longer work for this authority, and they did some very important work here, and so I'd like to thank them. Happy to take any questions.
Councillor Watts.
Chair. I take it you haven't got any figures for the fourth quarter because you've now completed the rollout, and we'd like to see some statistics for the fourth quarter. But between the second and the third quarter, the total recycling's gone down across the borough, so I'd say it'd be extremely disappointing that we're now rolling out glass collection across the borough and our recycling rates are actually going down. So that's one statement. And it's going to go down further because you said in the report 7.1, 85% of the glass is collected via now curbside, so 15% are coming from the bottle banks. So that total recycling rate and the tonnage is going to fall even further once we remove those bottle banks. So I can't see any logic there basically, because we're going to affect our overall recycling rate. Broken glass bottles in brown bags, I'm quite supportive of that, basically, banning that. I think, we have to have a few sticks to the residents if we're going to move recycling forward, and sort of banning that in bins is fine by me. What about broken glass? Are we allowed to stick that into the bin still, or what are we going to do with that? And obviously, one last thing, we're going to close all these bottle banks. I popped into the Labour Club the other night and I nearly got lynched because they said, well, you're taking our bottle bank away. We've gone out to all the clubs and where these are and told them that they have to go on to commercial. I presume they're going on to commercial. A lot of these have actually got very good community facilities in there. I could take the ones in Kemp Shop Club and the Labour Club. They have community events in there. It's going to add in extra burdens to these community clubs, which they'll have to offset. And we've got so many pubs and clubs going to the wall at the moment, so there's never a burden on communities, centres within our town. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Q4 figures, obviously we're only into March now, so there's a delay in getting the figures through. We do have the figures, and I do have the figures for me in front of me for January, which will give an indication, and I can tell you that the January glass collection figures are up significantly on December's figure, and this is just the monthly figure, not the quarters. It'll be due to Christmas, well, it probably is, but it is a positive. I suppose the easiest thing is to compare that with the December from the year before, or January, so the year before, and so if it gives you a comparison, I can tell you the year before in January we collected 296 tonnes of glass, and in January this year we collected 457 tonnes of glass, so that's a significant increase, 160 tonnes, nearly doubling. For December, just for an information, December we collected 325 tonnes, so we collected in January, we collected 120 tonnes more than we did in December, so that's the figures are good. Looking good, it's looking positive, and I would hope to see the Q4 figure would be up, but it's one of these things, it will be what it will be, and there's little we can do about that. Removal of bottle banks, I think the point I'd like to make there is that the proposal to take out the banks doesn't include all the banks, so although in theory, yes, there's another 25% in the banks, or 70, it's a bit of reduction, the usage has dropped by 75%, we will be leaving the most used banks in place. So if they're still heavily used, we don't intend to take them out. We don't want to do anything that would jeopardise our recycling figures. The ones we'll be taking out are the ones that are least used, and we would anticipate that those people would put their glass into or use the encouraged to use the curbside glass collection scheme. Broken glass, no problem. The ban is for glass jars, is for anything that's supposed to go into the curbside boxes, so no problem with that. As far as consultation, I might pass to Kevin on this if that's okay, because I know Kevin's been involved in that sort of thing.
Yeah, I mean, we're aware that a lot of bottle banks were located a long time ago when recycling first came into fashion at public sites, which included village halls, pub, car parks. They remain there ever since, and evidence suggests they're not solely used by the public for whom they were originally intended. We are aware that businesses use them, and they shouldn't be. They're running a business, they create profits, they should manage their waste and recycling responsibly and pay for disposing of their waste and recycling as well. All of the village halls and clubs where banks are located have been written to because they now come under Schedule 2 of waste regulations, which mean they have to pay to dispose of their waste, and we do now offer a recycling service for businesses and clubs and village halls, so they can dispose of their glass as well as their recycling that would normally go into domestic waste bins, such as cardboard, tins, cans, plastic bottles and aerosols.
Councillor Peach.
Thank you, Chair. Just wanted a quick question to find out whether the removal of the banks, obviously these are Basingstoke and Dean banks, there's no option for them to be replaced by Hampshire banks.
I'm not aware of Hampshire Bank. The recycling banks are all operated by the district councils. I'm not aware of any banks that are operated by Hampshire County Council. The only issue being, I suppose, thinking of the household waste recycling centres are the only points where the county would operate their own banks.
Thank you. Councillor Court.
Thank you. I'm going to be a little bit parochial now because being a Kempshot councillor, I do know quite a bit about Kempshot, and also being a resident of Kempshot, I know a bit more about it. I was interested to hear your comment just now that the most used recycling or glass banks are the ones that are being kept, and it's quite apparent that the one that I never use is the one in Downgrange because that's always full, and that's the one that's still going to be kept. I very rarely use Buckingham Parade, and I was down there this morning to get a paper from the local shop and just happened to notice that the glass banks were actually overflowing. So I don't use that one, again, because 9 out of 10 times if I go down there it's full. I tend to use the one at the village hall, and I was down there on Tuesday and the glass banks there were a good 2/3 full then. So I'm a bit concerned. The only one here that I don't have any experience of is actually the Rugby Football Club recycling bank, which probably was just put in for the rugby club. My main concern is, where's all this glass going to go? If the one at Downgrange is already full to overflowing, surely it's going to be more expensive to lay on extra emptyings of these bins. What's going to happen to all this glass? I'm just scared it's going to end up on street corners, hedgerows, and there's going to be more for our litter pickers to pick up.
Yeah, if I can respond to that on Councillor Court. By removing bottle banks, we would then push people towards using a curbside glass collection service, which is there. Residents can have more than one glass box, and they'll be collected and delivered free of charge by Veolia. The banks in Kempshot will remain, well, certainly the one I said, the one at Downgrange was one of a specific design, a rescape bank, and we have a number of those that were installed a number of years ago under Council Still's tutelage. And they do, yeah, we can arrange for that bank to be emptied more frequently with Veolia if our residents still want to use those banks. But hopefully by taking banks away that aren't that full, we will divert people to using their curbside glass boxes.
You probably aren't aware, but about 8 years ago there were very big problems in Kempshot with gangs actually going around bringing their own bottles and smashing them into houses, into cars, and it did. Members who were on the council then may remember, I think it was the infamous Phil Heath Act, actually brought it up mainly, and somebody said it sounds like there's gang warfare in Kempshot, and yes there was. And a lot of people, a lot of residents will not put, as they put it, ammunition at the end of their drives every fortnight for people to come round and use. When the curbside boxes were initially introduced, a lot of residents contacted me saying they wouldn't use them for that simple reason, and at the time I was given assurances that the bottle banks would remain, and in turn I assured the residents that they would remain. So my concern now is people will not use it in my area because of the experience they've had, and they have done very well in using the bottle banks that are provided. As I say, the only one here, and I probably will be under fire from the rugby club, that is not a public one and is probably only provided for the rugby club, but the other three I would like to see remain. Another impact which probably you're not aware of is that Kempshot is quite often held up as an example, but we do have a lot of community-minded people. A lot of people go out litter picking regularly, and we have monthly litter picks which do start and go round and come back to the bottle banks or the recycling banks, and the people do sort out all the recycling, and there's no way they're going to go and do their doggy walkies, go round and walk all the way down to Downgrange just to get rid of the glass bottles that they've collected. And there are actually quite a few in hedgerows.
Okay, I think the point with this is if members have got concerns about particular sites, I think the general principle is banks aren't getting used, and we would hope they wouldn't be used as much as There had been because of the curbside glass collection scheme. However, if there are banks there that you feel uncomfortable about removing, then we're quite happy to review this list, and we can do that with the portfolio holder and yourselves. So we've certainly asked members if they've got specific sites, and we take on board your comments about ChemShop, and possibly those sites wouldn't be appropriate to remove at the moment. We could put them onto, say, a reserve list, and just monitor the situation. As I say, we are intending to leave a number of banks across the borough the ones that we see are being well used, and if you'd like those to be considered to be included in that list, I would.
I have Councillor Baker, James, Waldridge and Harvey. So Councillor Baker next.
Thank you very much. Right, got quite a few questions, so I'll try and pick them up. If perhaps to keep the flow of thought going that we've just been on, I too was obviously very struck by the list of sites of bottle banks as being mainly pubs, clubs and village halls. And perhaps I should declare an interest as Chair of Trustees of a community centre. I was also aware of the issue over us all now having to pay for our waste collection. That's us as in community centres. So I know of some who already had said that they ask anyone who's organising a party or anything like that in their village hall, this not the one I'm associated with, but from elsewhere, who ask the organisers to take any bottles home with them. Now, to put them into their curbside glass, which is fine as long as their visitors to whichever the event is all are prepared to carry the bottles home and don't end up throwing them into the first ditch or hedgerow that they go past, or someone else's garden. So I'm very anxious about the impact on the pubs and on the village halls. Pubs are businesses, but we all know that they are struggling at the moment, and I'm sure that if they are using the public bottle bank rather than paying for commercial waste collection for bottles at the moment, that's probably a service from the Borough Council that they're extraordinarily grateful for and is very helpful to them. So I do worry about what the impact's going to be of taking away all of these bottle banks. And I mean, it perhaps would have been interesting to have got the stats for tonnages in each of these concerned, because that could have been perhaps the evidence to reassure us that these are bottle banks that aren't being used. So I'm worried about that. It was me who asked for the energy balance figures on the curbside glass recycling, and I'm very grateful to the team for producing information in answer to that inquiry. So thank you for doing that piece of work. But the logic of the argument that there would be a reduction in CO2 emissions because individual households won't be making special car journeys to go to a recycling bank, I'm sorry, I believe is disingenuous, or in fact totally flawed, because I believe that every single person who used to take glass to a recycling bank either took it to one they were going to be going past anyway when they made a journey that was already pre-planned, and perhaps they took them to the supermarket when they were going to do their shopping. So there were no additional journeys. So, yeah. And I indeed used to put mine in the car if I was driving here for an evening meeting when we had the bottle banks here, and put mine in the bank here. And I certainly never did an additional journey. So I think the stats that show that there is definitely a significant increase in CO2 emissions from collecting from curbside. I can understand the logic of saying ban bottles and jars from waste from the domestic refuse bin. I have some anxiety about that. We all know the problems that that some people have in identifying which piece of plastic is a bottle and which isn't, and the confusion over which bits of plastic can go in the green bin and which can't. And I think that's illustrated quite well in here with the fact that the paper reads about banning glass in the black bin. Well, actually, as you explained, what it means is banning glass bottles and glass jars from the black bin, and leaving Pyrex and broken glass and things like that still put in the black bin. So I suspect there will be a fair amount of confusion with people as to which bits of glass they're not allowed to put in their green bin, in their black bin. And I also have a slight concern over particularly difficult to clean bottles and jars, because if you don't feel like putting the empty peanut butter jar through your dishwasher, yes, that's one of the worst. Yes, one of the most difficult to get clean. Then what do you do with it? Or if perhaps you don't have a dishwasher, and B, you may have arthritic hands, and you don't want to try and stuff your hand into a peanut butter jar to clean it. Now, you're not supposed to put it in your recycling box if it's still dirty, because they're supposed to be clean, supposed to be rinsed. Then what can you do with the bottle? So.
Thank you. We did have a question.
Thanks very much. I'm not going to debate or won't go into arguments over the energy figures. I take your point on the private car use. I think with all of this, it's very difficult. We made some assumptions. Now, if you take that assumption that okay, the alternative is that nobody made an individual journey, and I'm quite happy to accept that because I think that's not unreasonable. But I'm sure there were some people who did. Then you would reduce the offset down. I think the point I would like to make with regard to glass recycling, it is one of the products in the recycling stream that it is recognised it is something you want to get out of the waste stream. It is recycled. It's recycled time after time, so you can use one glass bottle 20 times, 100 times. There's no limit to the amount of times it can be recycled. It is a good thing to stop or minimise the use of raw materials, natural materials. It has a very big benefit. There is a benefit. There's a very big carbon offset from actually using recycled glass as opposed to using the raw materials. So there is a benefit. Whatever recycling stream you're looking at, there is a cost and an energy cost associated with recycling it, and I don't think it's possible to do that even with the glass banks. Okay, that might have use less fuel travelling around, but there's still a cost. If you want to increase that recycling, you want to take more of that material out of the residual waste, then there is going to be an energy cost against that. I've spoken to colleagues and other authorities, tried to find out what information they've looked at, and it is something that I think is just generally accepted. There will be some sort of, there's a energy cost associated with collecting the glass, and whether that is good or bad in the overall scheme of things is a difficult one, and probably needs somebody far better qualified than I am to look into that. And I think I'll probably just leave that there, but I'll try to put forward a case to try and say that I think the case is minimal. Pubs, clubs, village halls. I note the concern about the impact on pubs and village halls. That's something that I think is underlying behind that. Something that is actually changing legislation. It's not something that we have any control over. Now with the new legislation, these properties, and Kevin probably can provide more information on that if required, but what class is what they call Schedule 2 properties, and certainly a lot of the charitable organisations which previously had their waste collected from us as part of the household waste stream, now are identified and classed as commercial waste, and we don't have any choice about whether or not we collect those or not. If they are there and they're taking solely the glass from those clubs, then it's very difficult for us to justify why we should continue to collect that glass. Legally, we're not permitted to, so that's the issue with that. As far as confusion, what glass is banned and what can be left in the black bin, we will be working with the communications team. We do a lot of good work with Basingstoke's communications team, and whilst the report might not have been clear on that, we'll make sure that message, when it's put out, is put out very clearly to the residents, so we'll do our best with that. And the problem of clean and unclean jars, I might pass to Kevin on that.
Thank you, John. Just before I go on to the message we give about cleaning jars, point you made about pubs and clubs using the bottle banks. You've got to remember that the introduction of bottle banks was for the public to use. It was for public to use only. It wasn't for any commercial premises to use to dispose of their waste. So I want to underline that. The message we always say to residents is that when it comes to recycling, we want your recycling to be clean, we want it to be dry, we want it to be loose. Basically, so it's easier to sort further down the line at the material recovery facility. When it comes to glass, we ask that they be clean, simply because we don't want during any hot sunny spells we get. Like just use the example Councillor Blake used of peanut butter, attracting wasps and things, and not only causing problems for residents but also for Veolia crew. Now, I know that during, we haven't had a particularly good summer at all, but so that it's understating a little bit. But I've seen good people put half jars half full of peanut butter and similar sort of products out, and Veolia will be emptying them. They'll take them. Basically, the glass goes into the back of the vehicle. It's smashed into small pieces. It's taken by freighted to a company called Berryman's, who actually sort all the glass out into different coloured streams, where it's thoroughly cleaned. So basically, they do the job that perhaps somebody who couldn't manage to get their hand inside a jar, or a dog to get their tongue inside a jar, to actually cleanse it out. So we're thankful that the sorting process is done and cleaning process is done further down the line to save residents having to do it at the outset.
Thank you. Councillor James.
Thank you, Chairman. The first thing, and possibly one of the reasons, I know it's always difficult to get a pattern of the percentage recycled as you roll out something over time. It sort of takes a while before you get a stable figure. And one possible reason for the slight dip was we, in Eastrop, were one of the first rollouts. And unfortunately, unlike Kempshire residents have drives, we don't. We tend to live in blocks, and so therefore our bins are collected up into one big place, and then they empty them all and everything else. And every Monday night I go in from work and I meet the rest of the community as we hunt round for our bins. It's a lot easier to find a very large wheelie bin, and much easier to move back home again, than the glass bins. And I keep seeing them appearing now in parking spaces and all over the place. My own bin has so far, I think, 400 yards was the furthest it's managed from my house, and I by chance saw it as I drove along back from the local shop. So I think a lot of them are going missing, getting smashed and everything else, which is, will people ring up and get them replaced? Has everyone put their house number on it? And the other thing is, when the bin men collect it, it would seem really simple just to sort of pop it inside the green bin, which is emptied on the same day, so it doesn't kind of go wandering around. But it's certainly an issue where I think in Eastrop it's dropping off because people have lost their bins. I think it's important to keep some bins, some of the glass collecting points, because I know there's a number of elderly people on my ward who find dragging out a big heavy bin, I mean they should drink less I guess, but dragging out a big old heavy box, it's not on wheels, it's quite a lot to carry from the kitchen, and so they'd rather just go down and when they go off to town take the 2 or 3 bottles with them and just drop them in the recycling bank as they always have done, creatures of habit and all that. So I think that's important. The other thing is I'd like to know what we've done about flatted developments, certainly the smaller accommodation. I know there was a proposal many years ago from an appalling proposal that we should have a separate box for card and a separate box of paper and a separate box of tins. It came from a group that's not been in administration for a while. You have a club in Sandys Road. They had this idea of lots of boxes, and I'm glad we never went with it because I haven't got room in my garden for all those boxes. I haven't got room for a compost bin, which is annoying as well, especially when it comes to garden waste. We're losing all these boxes, and the smaller, the flatted developments, we've not really got a comfortable solution that suits all of them. So are we making sure there's recycling bins next to where there's a large volume of establishments without gardens, really, dwellings without gardens, which is a lot in my ward. In terms of the actual list, I went through the list and I noticed there's a few in my ward, and I looked in Town Centre, the Irish Centre, Council Road, RG21 3DH, and also the Carnival Hall, Council Road, RG21 3DH, which kind of tells you the story, that from the Irish Centre you wouldn't be able to drink anything before you got to Carnival Hall. And in fact, if you go a little bit further down the road, there's some in Caston's Yard car park as well, so you've got 3 lots of bottle banks. So I think in areas like that it's absolutely sensible to remove 2 of them because they probably are very empty because you've got 3 on top of each other basically. So it might be worth sending this list to all the ward councillors for their specific wards and say these are the bins we're looking at going, these are the ones you're going to be left with, because I think you need that local knowledge, because I know that because I kind of go past it every day, and as Councillor Court mentioned, she knows Kempshot, she walks her husband or whatever it is, so so I think it's quite important that we we have all that local knowledge that the ward councillors can say yes, good idea, or no, because in some cases removing bottle banks creates a parking space, which is marvellous. In terms of the sticky jars, I do think there is one issue with sticky jars, and it's a personal view, not a party political view, but I do think as a borough we should ban Marmite. And I think we should just ditch it, get rid of it, ban it from all supermarkets, shops. In fact, we should make it an illicit substance because that's the stickiest product. It smells, it's horrible, it makes me feel sick, to be honest. There we go.
Thank you, Councillor James. With regards to, obviously I'd love to do something about Marmite, but unfortunately I can't. With regards to bins and boxes going missing, I mean, I analyse the information that's provided from our contact centre and provide reports on bins that go missing, bins that are damaged by the crews, bins that aren't returned to collection points, and that information is discussed with Veolia at every week. And where they fail to live up to those expectations that we expect from the contract, they are financially penalised under the default process. We are aware that a lot of boxes do go missing. The second lot of boxes, or the second tranche of boxes that were given to the residents in Phase 2 and Phase 3 have come in for some criticism from residents. They weren't as sturdy as the boxes that were issued in Phase 1, which included East Strop, Hatchborough and Kingston, just named 3 of the wards. But where residents complain and say the box is damaged or it's gone missing, they can have one reissued free of charge if they ring and tell us, yes. There's no compulsion for a resident to write their house number on their wheelie bins or their boxes. However, we recommend people do it when they phone and speak to us because it's some way of making sure you know who your bin is. An interesting point about when someone's glass box is emptied, can the crew put it back inside the wheelie bin? That's fine on occasions where a resident puts their glass box out on the same day as their recycling bin. Sometimes they might just put their glass box out with a waste bin, and then I wouldn't want the recycling crew to come along, empty the glass box and put that in the waste bin. I'd rather it be left next to it. The other issue is that a lot of the residents still have 140 litre wheeled bins for recycling, which are slightly slimmer, and the glass boxes, they don't fit in. With regards to the point about elderly residents, we do offer an assisted collection service. We advertise that best we can through various channels. So if any residents or any of your residents in your wards do have issues with putting their bin or glass box out for collection, if they phone the contact centre, we can get a form sent out to them and an officer will visit them if need be and make sure Veolia's crew can come along, collect the box bins from where they store their bins, empty them, and then take them back. They won't leave them lying around in the street. If they do, and they're found to be culpable, then they will be fined. Fine issue about Marmite. No, oh, that's fine issue. No. Yeah, the list of banks to ward councillors. I understand this list was actually published in Monday's Gazette, so I'm not sure what the process for of communication via. You don't need the Gazette. I don't know whether. Sorry. I don't know whether the. Yeah, I mean that list would have been provided to the comms team at Basingstoke and Dean, so I'm not sure what the process is for informing ward councillors of decisions like this. Obviously, I can't answer that question for you, but we can get that sorted, I'm sure.
Mr. Spakey wanted to come back.
Just on that issue of papers, not everyone sees the Monday Gazette, and some parts of the borough don't ever get the Gazette because they're reading the Andover Advertiser or the Newbury Weekly News. So actually, if the list could be simply emailed to all councillors, and
I'm just looking at the officers. Yes, that's quite possible to do.
Tracy nodding, so I'm hopeful. And all councillors, you know, just with a couple of lines saying, here's a list, you know, if there are any in your ward that you're worried about, you know, let us know. That would be much appreciated.
Can I come back on one point that was raised earlier? I should have mentioned it. It was very difficult for Veolia to actually provide individual weights for glass collected from individual banks. The analysis we asked was taken in August, September last year. And the crew were asked to just do a visual check over a number of weeks on how much glass was in the bottle banks. And there were a number of sites where they used to visit weekly that they decided, we're not going to visit weekly, it's not worth it, we'll come back and empty it every fortnight. When they empty a bottle bank, they tip it into the back of the wagon and go off and empty another one, and tip it in the back of the wagon and go off and empty another one. And tip it. So there's no exact science on exactly how much glass was collected from each individual site. It was just a purely visual check undertaken by, as I'm going to have to say, I'm going to have to big up Veolia by two very trusted members of the crew that Veolia respect greatly for doing this particular round.
I can vouch what you've said about disabled does work. If you do have a disabled resident, you ring in, they do to go the extra mile or the extra 200 yards or even 10 yards to where and it does work. Councillor Waldridge, Harvey, Tilby and Peach. Councillor Waldridge.
Thank you, Chair. A few questions, if I may. Firstly, it's about you've just touched on it a little bit there, but my big concern in this report is that there just doesn't seem to be the evidence there to go ahead with what you've done. And the methodology you've used just doesn't seem to be clear to me. It's mentioned in the report sort of 75% on one site, but there's no indication on which site that is, and you know, basically how you've made the decisions that you have to remove the bottle banks where you have, really. I suppose linked to that is, you know, I would like assurances that you won't be removing the one in the Brighton Hill Centre, you know, but given the lack of evidence or methodology, I have no assurances that you won't. So I'd just like some further clarification that one won't be removed. But if you say no, it won't. But you know, I'd like you to explain why it won't be, given that, you know, the methodology is lacking. That's my first question. Second question, touching on what Gavin said about the flats and also HMOs, I would like further clarification about what the policy is there, because it does seem that some flats are missing this service at the moment. And then another question, just for my own satisfaction, about mixed glass, because I still use the bottle banks rather than the curbside collection because of the mixed glass issue. I like going and putting all the different colours in there because I thought that gets sort of the higher value. So I'd like you to sort of clarify the situation about mixed glass, and if the bottle banks go, the issue that's been raised before in this committee about the value of the glass, and whether you could clear that one up for me as well. That's probably enough for now. Thank you.
We're going to share the field of 4 questions, Councillor Waldridge. There are 17 sites, including Brighton Hill, that we consider strategic for one reason or another. We're following what the Hart District Council have done. Really, they introduced curbside glass collection 6-7 years ago. They removed a lot of their smaller sites and they kept what they call strategic sites at supermarkets. That particular site isn't owned by the Borough Council, so if we were to remove them, we'd have to have permission by London and Cambridge, I understand, as owners. But sites such as, I'll just reel off a few, Morrison's and Chinham, and the two Sainsbury's stores. I said that they're privately owned land, and we will keep those because you do recognise that people will produce excess glass at certain times of the year, and they won't make a special trip to deposit their glass at those sites. So we do have 17 sites we want to keep. A couple of other sites we're keeping at in Abbey Road and at the Winklebury Centre. It links into Councillor James' comment and yours, Councillor Waldred, about flats. In September last year, we took delivery of special 240-litre wheeled bins, green ones with blue lids, that we provided to all the flats that I knew of, so they could recycle their glass. In some developments, we provided with 1,100 litres where there was a higher concentration of residents, but the vast majority of flatted developments have been provided with a communal wheeled bin for glass, together with their communal wheel bin for waste and communal wheel bin for recycling. If you're aware of any flatted developments in the borough, please let me know. Let me know if they haven't got any, and I'll certainly be taking that up with Veolia. Okay.
Right. The other point that was mentioned was the mixed glass, price of mixed glass versus the price of separated glass. I actually have got some figures on that. One thing I would say is don't get too hung up on the price of glass. The biggest benefit that the council gets is from the recycling credits, which is basically based on the tonnage that's taken out of the residual waste. For every tonne that we take out, we get £38 in value. Last year, that £38 totalled, I've got a figure somewhere, it came to about £120,000 just for the glass. So that's the benefit we get from the landfill tax, or the other side of the landfill tax. And in addition to that, we then get an income for the glass itself, and that does vary depending on whether it's clear, green, mixed or brown. But that does tend to vary. Over the last year, we received a total from the glass income was about 40,000. So it's about a third of what we get on average. There is a bigger income for clear glass, and the rate at the moment, the current rate is £30 per tonne for that, as opposed to mixed glass, which is £21 per tonne. So again, for clear glass, you get about a third more. That doesn't work out for the green and the brown. When you think about it, the green, I suppose because there's a lot of people drinking wine and things like that, and actually don't have such a big use for wine, green glass in this country, the value of that is not so great. So that's £23 a tonne. And brown glass, I suppose there can't be very many beer drinkers, maybe it's the other way around, too many. But Marmite, it's the Marmite eaters, that's what it is. They only get £15 a tonne for those. So you actually get, for brown glass, you get less than you do for the mixed glass. So I think if you balance the whole thing out, it doesn't really make that much difference, and certainly not from the segregation. As far as the end use of the glass is concerned, when it goes to sorting, they've got such sophisticated sorting mechanisms now with laser sorting, that it all goes to the same source. So whether it's separated or it's mixed, it all goes back to be reused in the manufacture of glass bottles and jars, rather than, certainly doesn't go to aggregate or anything like that. The only thing I'd also mention is that all of those figures, they are market-led, they do move very, very rapidly. The Q1 and Q2 figures, just to give you an indication, clear glass for Q1, Q2, for every tonne we were getting £20 per tonne. In Q3 that's jumped to £30. It's gone up by a third, just market-led for whatever reason. Mixed glass has jumped from £12.50 to £21.20 in the last quarter. So it's not something I wouldn't get too hung up about. It all ends up in the same destination, And the difference it actually makes to the income is very minimal.
Take the three speakers that haven't spoken yet. Councillor Harvey.
Thanks, Chair. Just to start with, the figures interesting. We've got looking at industry again. The figures we were looking at and researched up from RAP gave us again some interesting spreads. £40 for clear glass, thereabouts 32 for amber and the brown glass, green glass coming in at about 22, mixed glass down at 15, and that was their February 13 figures. And the biggest increase was seen in the actual separated glass. The smallest step increase was seen in their mixed glass, and that seemed to be the most price restrictive in terms of constrained increase amongst all of it. So again, there's different figures out there, isn't there, to look at it in a different way. Can I just say in terms of the issues, I mean, the flatted issue is important, and I think your point about those communal bins does make a difference. And in areas where we've got bin stores in flatted development, that's great, where you can clearly identify that there's a block of flats. There are a significant number of flatted areas within estates that don't have the visibility of simply being a block of flats. They are in amongst all the rest, and their bin stores do need, I think, equal the attention in terms of those communal bins, and they're really useful. And I do know that a number of residents have had real struggles persuading the council and Viola to put in those communal bins, because they've had to prove that they were communal bins serving those flats, and they then had to prove that they were communal bins that they were using, that were publicly accessible. So there was a bit of an issue there in terms of that. Needs to be looked at. In terms of the actual crates, the bit that seems to come to mind, and a lot of residents have raised with me, is the hazard of them as being road hazards, quite simply. Because when they're put back on the side of the road, and invariably they wind up in the middle of the road for all a variety of reasons. So it's not just as straightforward as simply the team putting them back in a safe place. They don't always stay in that place. It's another issue, another point to bear in mind. The 2.5% I think is disappointing compared to where we'd like to see it be, and I do think the bottle banks do create a really important contribution. So I wouldn't want to see any of the bottle banks removed, to be honest, because at the moment, as a councillor here with the report in front of us, I don't think we've got the evidence, respecting the visual study that's been done, to justify the figure of a 75% reduction. Because it does only refer to in some cases. It isn't a statistical analysis that gives us evidence to say that those should be removed. And if you look at the list that you've got here, the one that made me smile the most was the idea of having Berry Brothers with a bottle bank. I mean, that seems pretty obvious when you think about it, particularly in our ward. But in the context of the Osborne shops, it just seems daft that you would take the Osborne shop. That is a really good community accessible bottle bank. Oak Ridge West Community Centre? Well, yeah, okay, it's a community centre, but it almost seems as well that we give community centres significant grants to help keep them afloat, and then you take with one and give away with the other. There's a balance here between the costs that they're facing, and that there's no valuation, there's no analysis of that. So the Popley Fields one again is a similar one. You know, it might well be if you want to charge the community centre to have it, but then you're only really hurting them because we'll have to pick up the bill somewhere else. Just doesn't add up there. Thinking that one through. The pubs and the clubs is an issue that everyone else has raised, and I'd echo that. In particular, Councillor Wooldridge and Councillor Court's point about bottles in hedges. Because the other issue is that there are significant times, and I do this myself, I don't drink enough as to put a full crate out, so I don't put it out every week because there's no point. And there's lots of people that do that. So there are issues where you wind up with 2 or 3 weeks between putting your crate out to actually get a meaningful amount of glass. Now, I've tried doing that as different from taking it down the bottle bank, and I find it a lot easier because I don't create the volume of glass. And as Paul has said this, you go to the bottle bank, and I used to come here with it and put it in the bottle bank because it's quicker, it's easier, I can do it, and it turns over a lot quicker than simply waiting a month odd to build up enough to stick out for the binman to take away. And I know I'm not the only one that goes to them. There's lots of other people that have expressed that view to me. And if it's sat outside, it is there as ammunition for others to use, which has always been the issue with the style of crate we've got. And no disrespect to what Gavin was joking about in terms of the idea of separating out. The point that we were making in other councils, and they are Labour, Lib Dem and Tory councils, so we've all got party colleagues in different parts of the country that have separated out the bit. The idea was the food waste bit. So the problem I have with the context of banning it from the bins is, in a flatted development, that's not always straightforward, because if you haven't got the option to recycle glass, what do you do? If the education and the leaflets and the actual communication hasn't taken place, and the Gazette is not where it should be happening, then we're not telling residents that you need to really tell them that that's going to be the case. And I do think there are examples of places where people just don't have the ability to recycle in the way that you're going to force them to. So I go and look at the enforcement bit. If I could just turn to that for a second. When you talk about the process, can I just absolutely have it on the record? We're not talking about punitive action. What we're actually talking about here is reminding people, and reminding people. We're not looking at using the fixed penalty process, are we, in relation to this? No, brilliant. That's good. That's important. And so I guess really in terms of location, have we actually done a review of locations of where we think we might want to put bottle banks? Because we now think that actually is a very good place to have a bottle bank, where we don't at the moment. Or take away from areas where we said, okay, you really have done the analysis that says this isn't the place anymore, and then take it away. We've done that level of analysis.
Yeah. To look at introducing new bottle banks, I don't think that we've considered that, and it's something we've looked at. I don't think it's something. I think it's something that if it was felt there was a justification, then we could look at it. I would hope that in most cases that curbside, with the curbside scheme, everybody has got the ability to use the bins, so that hopefully that they would use that. As far as banning glass is concerned, then it is very much all about, I suppose it's trying to encourage people. Whilst banning is quite a harsh word, isn't it? And it's not a case of you're going to be hauled across the coals if you put glass in there. Hopefully it's quite clear in the report. Paragraph 6.4 spells out what people are going to do. It's going to be, so it's banned. So first time it happens, somebody gets a bin hanger on their bin, telling them that they shouldn't be doing that. Next time it happens, a bin hanger will be left on the bin, and the bin won't be emptied. The expectation will be that bin will be emptied the following week, provided the glass has been removed. So it's not being that, we're not penalising anybody. We're not going to be holding them to account. We're not going to be issuing fixed penalties or anything like that. If it continued and it was an ongoing problem, then that would involve a visit from the waste and recycling team. The whole point of this is really is an encouragement. Banning, we will still collect their bins and we will still pick up their waste, so I wouldn't want to pick up on that. There were a couple of other points there, and I don't know if Kevin's able to pick up on those.
I'd like to think I'm probably the only person in this room that's probably been to virtually every single flat development in Basingstoke as part of my everyday work, but I can only go back to what I said earlier. If you know anywhere that doesn't have a communal recycling facility, whether it's recycling or for glass, then please let me know. I know there's easy ones that we got, perhaps I'm using Rooksdown as an example because I seem to be up there an awful lot of time, where communal bin stores are built and we're advised by a housing association as soon as residents move in, and then we provide them with the necessary bins for the recycling, bins for the glass and for waste, and I will provide them with a letter with recycling information and a flat bag for them to use to recycle their everyday items. As I said, if there are some estate flats where things aren't as too obvious, I've tried to pick all those up the best I can. If I can use East Shore as an example, we've got a number of sort of very small flats in Arran Court, Cheltenham Court, things like that, where had some issues recently that where they have some shared bins, very small bin stores. They're provided with a shared box because a bin would be too big for the residents and the crews to manage. So they share a box, and that's deemed sufficient. But again, I can think about if you know anywhere that doesn't have a recycling bin for glass in the communal area, if you can let me know, then I will investigate it. Where new residents move into flats, and I'll deal with them as soon as I can once I'm advised by either residents or the housing association. The crates and road hazards. I'd be lying if I said we don't get people phoning to say that crates are left in awkward places, whether it's on the pavement blocking pedestrians or on the edge of roads. Once a bin or a glass box has been emptied, it becomes instantly lighter. Therefore, it's going to be more chance it's going to blow around in the wind, especially the week we've had. I was out with Veolia on Tuesday, and a supervisor said he couldn't believe the amount of issues where he's seen bins just blowing over because of the weather we had. We can't account for that. Even if the crew put a box back in the correct location, it might still blow into a road. It's unfortunately it is a hazard, but But where residents are generally concerned, they need to phone us, and we will speak to the supervisors. And if bin men aren't returning the bins or the boxes to the appropriate place, then they will be spoken to and dealt with under a disciplinary procedure. Osborne Road shops. Again, the bins aren't located on land owned by the Borough Council. That area is very close to a state where everyone's been provided with a glass box to recycle their glass. So why should we provide or ask Veolia to empty or visit that area twice to collect glass that residents can put in their glass box? I take your point about storing it up and getting it into the stream, because that site is visited every week. I'm going to go back to why we want to remove the boxes, because remove the bottle banks, because everyone does have the facility to recycle from the curbside. I think we're discussing things that could have been raised or raised before. We considered introducing the scheme. You mentioned about the antisocial issues. These things, I understand, could have been or perhaps were mentioned before the curbside glass scheme was introduced. It is now here. We can't go back and take all the boxes back out and put more bottle banks out. They are here. We've had very few issues or reports from residents to say there have been antisocial issues. Yes, there have been some, and there is a fear. I think the fear is greater than the actual or the threat of it actually happening. But we've had very few cases reported to us to say that I've seen someone pick a load of bottles and smash them around near my area. I think I've had one that occurred in Buckskin a couple of weeks ago, but that was it. I'm not saying it isn't happening, but unless we know about it, then we can't assist. You mentioned about enforcement. Yeah, we're not here to penalise people for not recycling. The whole idea behind it is it should be a part of your way of life, and we're constantly reminding residents who do phone to say, my neighbour isn't recycling, can you provide some more information? I've mentioned when new residents move in, I do my best to get new information out to them, or when the recycling takes place, what goes where. I spend a lot of time talking to schools, to groups of people about recycling, and forever getting questions. Oh, I didn't know you couldn't do that. I didn't know you couldn't do that. So we do have a team of dedicated officers that will spend time speaking to the public about recycling and the new initiatives that are coming on board. I've been an officer in the recycling area for about 6 years now. The issue of putting new sites out wasn't on the agenda. It was always the thought that at some point bottle banks would be removed in line with what other authorities are doing. Other authorities have gone down the route of offering curbside glass collections as a way of providing what the residents asked for. Many residents before this came on board were asking council officers, can we have a curbside glass collection service? I know they do in West Berks, I know they do in Reading, and we're only following what other authorities are doing and providing a service that we believe residents want.
Councillor Tilbury.
Thank you, Chair. But the first one's quite an easy one. I've seen this often in officer reports. We always refer to the black bins, where the bins outside my house and all the other ones in Overton are all grey, and this does confuse people because we seem to use black, grey, whereas the other ones are green. I've had serious eyesight problems, and I see different colours in different eyes. But I see a green bin, and I see different colours of grey, but they're certainly grey and not black. And if that can be clarified, because it does cause a bit of confusion on there in reports, because people who move into this area may have come from an area where they do have black bins. Where my sister lives, the bins are black up there. They're black, brown and blue. And I think they got another one. They've got like 5 up there. But this issue of the bottle banks in pubs, well, I think, I think you touched on the fact that many of these people, the pubs themselves are using these for their empties. And I came across this some years ago, and I just happened to run the landlord of a local pub, emptying his estate. Well, he didn't have one in his pub there, but he was using the local bottle bank and emptying them all in there because, of course, the brewery won't take them away anymore, so they've got to dispose of them. But the problem is, if we now turn around and say to them, well, you can't do that, will they go and put them in the nearest bottle bank they can access, given the volumes they're generally dealing with? Or if they go for a commercial one, then we lose them out of our waste stream. They may well just go to another contractor that isn't Veolia. So how will that be dealt with? I mean, I know what's the one, Southern, I think, do a lot of waste recycling round, certainly round Overton, you know, for some of the commercial ones. But of course, that doesn't go into, I don't think that goes into our figures. We could end up losing all this. We would lose some of the, you know, the overall waste number would go down. But this is good waste, and that it helps our recycling figures, as opposed to rubbish waste that we don't want. Sorry, I'm doing that. The grey bin waste. So, so I think there is an issue there. And certainly you've got the Red Line car park one as being a low usage one, where nearly every week when I go to Overton on the Monday morning, I'm held up by the lorry emptying that, because to empty it they can't get in their car park, so they park in the main road, hold up all the traffic and empty it out. So it's being emptied, it seems to be nearly every week. So there's an issue there with that anyway, so it seems to be quite well used, and I suspect it is probably from the pubs emptied. But the obvious point is, is it possible to go back to these and say, well, clearly most of the glass that's going in there is coming out of your pub, you know, can we charge them for it? Because I suspect it's probably in their interest to do that rather than employ another contractor, because we do have a waste. We can do commercial waste and do it that way, because I suspect a lot of these people say we'd rather keep the bin we've got there or have some sort of system of dealing with that, because if you, as you know, as we point out, most of these are commercial premises, and the same with the social clubs. And can we even ask them and say, well, you know, are they being emptied every week? And if not, how often do you actually need them empty? Because if we're going along, I mean, you sort of suggest that the crews are saying, well, actually, that one only once a month's more than adequate for that one there, and that's probably the case. So that deals with that sort of side of it there. But I think it may be worth looking at, because then we could retain the waste, the bottles, and they go into our waste stream and they're accounted for as they are now, and everyone's happy. And that would seem, you know, whether they do it through a commercial contract or through that, if we can find a way of capturing that. Because I know we've been looking at trying to do commercial waste collection, and this would seem an obvious way of doing it, because, as you say, in theory they were there for the public, but most of the public aren't aware of a lot of these sites that they're for them. They're just, and the main users are the ones, because the breweries won't take the empties back, which is another problem in itself. But I think the thing that concerns me with all of this is the overall sustainability of this. I mean, I think John sort of made the point, well, actually the actual value of the glass is quite good now. It has gone up quite recently. I mean, one time we were down to, it was like 0 to £1 a tonne for mixed glass a few years back, and that's clearly driven by the market. The money we make is a recycling credit from taking out a landfill, but it's obvious to me that at some point the government's going to say, well, we've done that, we're meeting the landfill, we're going to take the recycling credit away. And at that point we're high and dry, because we're then going to have to cover all the costs of this. And as you say, it's £323,000. It started off at 300, but of course the 23, I suspect a large chunk of that, or possibly all of that, is this is all our waste contracts are inflationary. They go up every year by, well, it used to be RPI plus or whatever. It's now a mixed basket of wages, CPI, blah blah. You know, about 4 or 5. The price of fuel, all those sorts of issues there. And of course, the price of fuel goes up if more people use it. And of course, we're now going to be using 8,170 gallons more a year, which is £55,000 worth of fuel. Now that's, you know, what concerns me from a sustainability point of view is we are using a lot of high grade energy fuel to collect a lot of relatively low value glass, which has only got a value because of the totally artificial market created by the recycling credits, which just strikes me as wrong. And at some point this is all going to fall apart, and we're creating a system where, I mean, it is a good service for residents. Most people say, oh, it's much easier to put the bottles out in my little box and whatever than take them to the bottle bank, because I don't have to drop off on the way. I mean, most people, I think, weren't actually making a special journey. I'm sure some possibly did, but most people who are interested in recycling know that it's not a good idea to put a load of worthless glass in your car and drive it several miles and use gallons of petrol to do it. So this is what concerns me longer term, because we're setting up a system, and once we take all these banks away, it's taken years to get people to the level of using a sustainable recycling system, and we're going to take that all away. And you know, all right, there are a lot of to collect here, and there are some that could probably go. I mean, one that could definitely go is the ITT Sports and Social Club, because it's closed down. It's been turned into a fitness centre. So even they're not throwing their empties in there anymore. So I know that well, because I do a lot of work for them. That sadly hit the floor a few years ago, which is why that's a low one. So, but it does worry me with this all the way through. That, you know, if we're going to provide this as a service, that's one issue, and the public undoubtedly like that. If we're doing it to recycle and be green, this isn't a very green way of doing things. We'd be better off incentivising people to collect it locally and pick up centrally. You know, I watched our trucks going around the more rural areas round over. I mean, Overton's fairly compact, the town is, but when they're trundling around Steventon and all the little out in the sticks places out near me, and when you get out to East Wood, to go out there to collect 5 or 6 bottles with a truck that does about 8 miles to the gallon, that's not sustainable, and it's not sustainable in the longer term. It's, you know, the price of diesel is going to skyrocket, isn't it? It's, you know, so, you know, well, I think we're heading in a direction that's going to leave us, and you know, our costs are going to increase. We're going to reach a point that these costs will continue to go up year on year. We've already got the most expensive waste collection costs in Hampshire, and not far off the most expensive in Britain. And all these sorts of things are not helping. There's one they say, well, we're providing a service, but at the end of the day, it's at what cost? Thank you.
Come back on a point there. I suppose on the sustainability point, obviously, I think we're all signed up. Do we want to do things in the most sustainable way possible? My concern, I suppose, at the moment is that the decision has been made to go to curbside glass, and that scheme has now been implemented. No proposals that we're now going to take that out. At the moment, the current position is you're running 2 systems. It's duplication. I don't think you need it, and that's probably the worst position I would have thought from a sustainability point of view. If in the long term, in the future, and I take on board, so you know what might happen, I don't see that the recycling credits are going to change. That's all based on landfill tax that's been in place now for 20 plus years, I would think. It's if anything, it's going to increase. It's continually increasing with anything to do with sustainability. It's a government-based initiative. They're going to look to increase it. They want to incentivise more and more authorities to take that recycling out of the waste stream. It's not so critical in Basingstoke because we incinerate the residual waste, but certainly those areas where they landfill it, that problem is still a big problem in a lot of areas. I don't think that the risk of losing that income is going to disappear. And if you did and the money became a problem, then okay, I don't think it would be that big a problem to put the glass banks back in. If you'd have to unwind everything, it would be a huge thing to do. My concern with not changing and not removing the banks now is I think it's duplication. I don't see it's achieving much. I wouldn't worry too much about the recycling rate. I understand concerns that if we take the banks out, so there might be some glass that's going into those banks that might not end up through our glass stream. It could end up going into other authorities' glass streams. I don't know. It could go into commercial waste service. All I would say is that by removing these banks, we're following the same process we followed in Hart 6 years ago, and as soon as we had curbside glass in there, we removed the majority of banks. We still have a few well-used ones there, and as I mentioned in the introduction to my report, or to the report, we're now seeing a 10% recycling rate in glass. We don't do anything differently in Hart. We do in Basingstoke. You've currently got 7% here. So if anything, I think that figure is going to continue to grow, and I don't think removing the banks will make any difference, if anything. What I would say is if you do continue to say there is duplication, you're going to be continuing as a council to spend £40,000 that you don't need to spend. You might lose a little bit of income, but I've already mentioned there's minimal, and in the long run, I don't think it'll make any difference. So I think that was the overall points on that. I was going to mention about commercial waste service. We offer that. So those the banks, the pubs and clubs that you're concerned about, yes, we can, and we could. I'd hope we'd look to promote our commercial waste service, but maybe Kevin could pick up on that.
Yeah, just to give you an idea of the costs for commercial glass recycling service for pubs. Just come back from the Wheat Sheaf along Winton Square. They have a 660 litre glass bin which is emptied every fortnight, and they pay £3 a week. Out their glass. So, and I've already spoken to my colleague Joe Perrin, who administers the commercial trading waste and recycling service, and the sites we've identified where glass banks are near pubs or social clubs, we will write to them straight away, letting them know the banks will be removed and offering them our very competitive service. Yes, there are other providers that have been mentioned already that do a similar thing, but we like to think we can keep them as customers of Basingstoke, bearing in mind they've been using our service for free for a number of years. A couple other points you mentioned. One sort of connected to the Red Line in Overton. Having spoken to the publican there, she's keen for the bottle banks to be removed because they're taking up parking spaces which she considers are more valuable to her business than the bottle banks, and she has her own arrangement to have her glass disposed of. And the first issue you made was the black and grey issue. Coming from having worked for Basingstoke and Dean before moving to Hart, I was always referred to the waste bin as a waste bin. It wasn't a rubbish bin or a refuse bin or anything else, and it was always grey. I know that we've ordered bins from different suppliers, and the gradient of colour, if that's the right term, has changed to a darker hue. But it comes down to communications, and so the communications team at Basingstoke may refer to things as black bins because they have a different idea of what the colour is than the officers do. But as long as the recycling bins stay green, then I think we'll be all right there.
There's only two.
Councillors, can I bring your attention to page 1 of 9, please, and look at the bottom there what the recommendations are. Councillor Court.
I'd like to suggest an amendment to 2.2 to read, recommends the proposed removal of glass banks is considered after taking into account input from ward members. With that amendment, I'm quite happy with that recommendation.
Councillor Harvey.
Thank you, Chair. I totally appreciate where Councillor Court's coming from, and I think you're right. The question I've got is, if a ward member says, I want this bottle bank to stay, and the portfolio holder says, no, where do we stand? If the bottle bank is then described as having a 75% reduction because we've agreed the report's evidence base doesn't support the conclusion that all the bottle banks have reduced by 75%, which is exactly what you said. So I do understand where you're coming from, but what I don't have the confidence is that a ward member would actually have the ability to stop a bottle bank being removed. And I'm conscious that we didn't even know about it because as ward members the communications team didn't bother to tell us, they went straight to the Gazette. They do that all the time. The communications team don't take ward members seriously in that respect. It's always the cabinet and straight to the Gazette. So I'd love to beef it up actually. I don't want to be awkward on this for the sake of being awkward, but the point is, unless the bottle banks are proven that they're not needed, and they're proven that they're not needed, then why are we seeking to remove them? I think they should stay until we've actually got a proper evidential base to say, and we haven't even done a review of locations, there might be a better place for some of these to be put where we would get a good recycling rate, because the review's never taken place, we never looked at it. And you said yourself, and I do agree with you, that actually when this was originally put through, members were reassured that bottle banks wouldn't simply be removed, that they would be maintained. It's 23p a year we're asking our residents to pay for the bottle banks around the borough. Thereabouts, you might think that's a lot of money. I don't know, it's just the cost it is. It's 0.02% of our revenue budget to have bottle banks in the borough. And we've increased it by 60 grand in income anyway, but we're looking to save 40 grand on top as well. You know, with increased enough income, we can still make 20 grand for the budget and still have our bottle banks because of the income generation from the other curbside glass. I just don't think at the moment it stacks up to have the bottle banks removed. So I appreciate Councillor Court's comment, I just don't think it's strong enough.
I think the officers made the point on many occasions tonight that we actually have bottle banks on every single domestic premises. So we do have them in quite a few places and we are duplicating. Could Councillor Court reread what she actually said, please?
Recommends the proposed removal of glass banks is considered after taking into account input from ward members.
Councillor Peach?
Not sure if I second these things, but I'd second that.
Thank you. Right, sorry, we have a proposal that's been proposed and seconded. Right, can we please take a vote on it? So have the officers got it?
Recommends the proposed removal of glass banks is considered after taking into account input from ward members.
The officer would like to speak.
Could I make a suggestion, Councillor Harvey, picking up on your point that the evidence comes the other way, maybe? As it's difficult to prove a negative in that something isn't used, but in consideration with ward members, would you be able to demonstrate that something is being used?
I love it how the ward members are suddenly responsible for finding out. I'm going to get my measuring stick out and go. I mean, the reality is actually, I just don't think. City science. Yeah, exactly. Get it up the head by the glasses it comes through. I would just say, Chair, I appreciate what the officer says, but I don't think the bottle bank should be removed because the report doesn't give us the evidence to do it. And it's not on the councillor's job to go and sort out the evidence in that respect. I do respect what you're saying, but it isn't. If the officers come up and tell us the evidence tells us this, well, you haven't. So I don't support the report in that sense.
Councillor Tilbury, did you want to...
But obviously, from what's come out tonight, from the obviously, as I suggest, the ITT Sports and Social, I don't think there's an issue with that. From what Kevin said, the red line, they would like it taken away anyway, and that suits me because they're a bit of a new, and they're looking to improve the road there, so it'll make it even more of a nuisance. So those two would go. If a lot of these ones, if the pubs, if we approach them and they say, well, actually, we'd quite like to pay for it to keep it there, then probably there isn't an issue with taking it away. Whether they're still used by the public or it's just used by the pub for their empties, that's another issue. I mean, if they're happy to let the public use it, and in most cases they're not going to bother. I suspect there's relatively little public use. That's the reality. So that would take a lot out. So if the ones that are left then are addressed by that, then I don't think there's actually that many left, and it's really then. I think more, as Anne said, the ward members could look at that and say, is there a good reason for that, or. I suspect there's not many. I suspect a lot of them will either fall out or we will end up being paid for them, which would get rid of a lot of the problem, because I think, as John sort of made the point, that we're incurring a cost for these, but if we can now offload that onto these premises and that cost disappear, a lot of the cost of it will just disappear. I mean, that would seem...
Picking up on members' concerns on this, I was just wondering if there's an opportunity here to say something along the lines of the recommendation here that the council suggested, but subject to consultation with ward members and possibly landowners. If, as you say, I think there's an issue here that I think a lot of these you probably won't find there's any objection to, and those ones, let's just remove them. If there is an objection, let's put them onto a reserve list, and we can discuss with the portfolio holder how we deal with that. So some sort of reserve list is what I'm thinking, and I don't think you will end up with that many banks on that reserve list, personally.
Councillor James and then Councillor Court.
I think the officer may have come up with some good wording. I mean, the wording I had that was slightly different to Anne's, and it was a similar thing, was recommends further consultation on the removal of grass banks with relevant ward councillors. The only reason is I don't want to vote to recommend the removal of glass banks subject to. I want to recommend the consultation of the removal of glass banks, because that's the important difference tonight. We're recommending, which we can tell to Councillor Tilbury's mentioned 2, 3 that can be moved from his ward. There's 2 that can go from my ward. So it's going to be an awful lot of actually consensus that they are excessive and we could use the space better. But it's just those little banks that are very dear to that community that the local ward councillor may be aware of. So I don't want to recommend removal of anything. I want to recommend the consultation on the removal, because I accept the principle. We don't want duplication. That's really silly. And as I say, that they get graffitied and everything else. They're not being used for anything else. They'll just get used for the wrong things. So I'm not against the removal of some of them, but I think we should be recommending further consultation on rather than actual removal. That makes sense.
The subject to, if there's no objection, that we look to remove them, because otherwise we go back, and then the ones that we've got objections to we can review further.
Yeah, exactly what the officer said. I'd agree with that. You don't go round and round in circles consulting. Once it's consulted, we agree, they go.
Ask the officer to reword it and to make sure we're happy.
The committee recommends further consultation on the removal of glass banks, and where there's no objection to continue, where there is objection, create ward councillors, consultation with ward councillors. Recommends further consultation with ward councillors on the removal of.
Thank you. Do we have general consensus on that? Sorry, Councillor Watts.
Is that going to come back to the committee then after the conduct the consultation, see what the decisions are to close which ones down? Was that?
There was no plan for it to come back to the committee.
Straight
but
to the cabinet, and they're going to make a recommendation to close certain ones down, whether they like what we say in wards or not, basically.
At the moment, there's no plan for it to come back here, because I don't know, sitting here, whether we're talking of a third or two-thirds are non-contentious. I'm really not quite sure the percent that are contentious. Sorry, contentious is the wrong word. I'm not sure that the few that are an issue, and I would hope that that could be done on a ward member to portfolio hold person. I hope that's the case. Just to make sure what we're going to vote on. Right, would you like to read it out, please?
Committee recommends consultation with ward councillors on the removal of recycling banks. Where objections are received, a reserve list is created for further consideration. Where no objection, removal is to proceed.
Is that generally agreed? Thank you very much. Can we just, on page 1 of 9, can we look 2.1, we've accepted, correct? 2.2 we've adjusted with this just motion. 2.3, can, after recommends the banning of glass, can we brackets bottles and jars, and then carry on with the same, please? Just to clarify that it's bottles and jars. We're not talking about mirrors or window panes, things like that.
Yeah.
So, is everybody happy with 2.3 if we add bottles and jars into there? Councillor Harvey.
And just for the record, Chair, notes the progress made in implementing the borough-wide curbside. To me, that means rolling it out. It doesn't mean the 2.5%, because that's not progress in any, not in the sense of the 5% we were expecting.
It's noted, thank you. Right, if 2.1, 2.2 and 2.3 are accepted, 2.2 and 2.3 slight adjustments, well, major adjustment on 2.2, that concludes the business for tonight. Thank you very much. And thanks for the officers. It's a slightly longer meeting than I intended.